The whispers erupted like wildfire through the small church in Animas Forks, Colorado, as Fiona Nolan stood alone at the altar, her white satin gown gleaming in the sunlight that streamed through the stained glass windows. The spring of 1878 was supposed to bring her happiness, not this public humiliation as the minutes ticked by with no sign of her groom, Thomas Blackwell. "I'm sorry, Miss Nolan," Reverend Miller said gently, his weathered face creased with concern. "It appears Mr. Blackwell will not be joining us today." Fiona's hands trembled as she clutched her bouquet of white roses, the petals already beginning to wilt in the warm May air. She'd spent 2 years of her life waiting for this day, working alongside her father in their general store, saving every penny for her wedding dress, and the small house on the edge of town that Thomas had promised to buy once they were married. "Perhaps we should wait a bit longer," she suggested, her voice barely above a whisper. The church was packed with nearly everyone from Animas Forks and the surrounding mining camps. Her humiliation was complete. Mrs. Peterson, the organist, shifted uncomfortably on her bench, exchanging knowing looks with the other ladies of the church. Behind Fiona, her maid of honor Clara squeezed her shoulder gently. "Fiona," her father said, stepping up beside her. Michael Nolan's voice was tight with controlled anger. "A messenger just arrived. Thomas left town on the morning stage. He's not coming." The bouquet fell from Fiona's hands, white petals scattering across the church's wooden floor. The murmurs around her grew louder, a storm of pity and scandal that threatened to drown her. She looked around at the faces of friends, neighbors, and customers from her father's store, all witnessing her shame. Without a word, Fiona gathered her skirts and fled down the aisle, past the shocked faces and whispered comments. She burst through the church doors into the bright Colorado sunshine, tears blinding her as she stumbled down the steps. "Whoa there, miss," a deep voice said as strong hands caught her before she fell face first onto the dirt road. "Careful now." Fiona looked up into the face of a stranger. He was tall, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of the summer sky. His clothes were trail-worn faded denim pants, a simple cotton shirt and scuffed leather boots. A cowboy's hat hung from a string at his back. "I'm sorry," she stammered, trying to pull away, mortified that this stranger was witnessing her in such a state. "No need for apologies, madam," he replied, steadying her but respectfully dropping his hands once she found her footing. "Samuel Winters, at your service." Behind her, the church doors opened again as guests began to filter out, their curious eyes fixed on Fiona and the stranger. "I need to go," she whispered desperately. "I can't face them." Samuel glanced over her shoulder at the growing crowd, understanding dawning in his eyes as he took in her wedding dress and tear-streaked face. "Allow me to escort you home, miss," he offered, his voice gentle but strong. "No lady should walk these streets alone, especially on a day like today." Fiona hesitated, but the thought of walking through town alone in her wedding dress, the object of whispers and stares, was unbearable. She nodded once, not trusting her voice. Samuel removed his worn leather jacket and draped it carefully over her shoulders, providing at least some cover for her elaborate gown. He offered his arm, and after a moment's hesitation, she took it. "Where to, miss?" he asked quietly. "Nolan," she supplied. "Fiona Nolan. My father's store is at the end of Main Street. We live above it." They walked in silence, Fiona painfully aware of the curtains twitching in windows as they passed, the conversations that halted as people stepped outside to watch their progress. Samuel kept his eyes forward, his stride unhurried but purposeful, as if escorting abandoned brides was something he did every day. "You're new in town," Fiona said finally, desperate to think about anything other than her own situation. "Just arrived yesterday," Samuel confirmed. "I've been working cattle drives up from Texas. Thought I might find different work in the mining towns." "There's not much mining happening anymore," Fiona replied automatically, falling into the familiar pattern of information she'd given countless travelers who passed through her father's store. "Most of the silver's played out. Some operations still running, but nothing like it was 10 years ago." Samuel nodded, seemingly content with her answer and not pushing for more conversation when it was clear she was struggling to maintain her composure. As they approached the general store, Fiona's father came running down the street, his Sunday suit disheveled, face red with exertion. "Fiona, thank God," he called out, slowing as he saw Samuel. His eyes narrowed suspiciously. "Who's this?" "Mr. Samuel Winters, Papa," Fiona said, suddenly aware of how this might look. "He was kind enough to walk me home." Michael Nolan studied the cowboy carefully before extending his hand. "Michael Nolan, thank you for looking after my daughter, Mr. Winters." Samuel shook his hand firmly. "Any decent man would have done the same, sir. I'm sorry for the circumstances." Fiona slipped the jacket from her shoulders and returned it to Samuel. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for your kindness to a stranger." "We're all strangers until we meet, Miss Nolan," Samuel replied with a small smile. He tipped his hat to her and her father before turning to leave. "Wait," Michael called after him. "Where are you staying in town?" Samuel turned back. "Nowhere yet, sir. I was going to ask around once I'd gotten my bearings." Michael glanced at his daughter, then back to Samuel. "We've got a small room in the back of the store. It's nothing fancy, but it's clean. Consider it payment for helping Fiona today. And I could use an extra hand unloading the supply wagons tomorrow if you're looking for work." Fiona stared at her father in surprise. He was notoriously cautious about strangers, especially when it came to offering work or lodging. Samuel considered the offer. "That's mighty generous, Mr. Nolan. I'd be happy to help with the wagons, but I insist on paying fair price for the room." "We can discuss terms tomorrow," Michael replied with a nod. "For now, come inside. Fiona needs to rest and I should get back to the church to deal with everything." Inside the store, Fiona felt the weight of the day crashing down on her. Her wedding day, the day that was supposed to begin her new life, had instead become a humiliation she would never live down in this small town. "I'll show you to the room, Mr. Winters," she said, desperate for something to do. "Then I need to change out of this dress." Her father squeezed her shoulder gently. "I'll handle things at the church, Fiona. Don't you worry about a thing. Rest now." With a warning glance at Samuel, he headed back out the door. The back room was simple: a narrow bed, a small table, a chair, and a washstand. It was where traveling salesmen sometimes stayed when passing through town. "It's not much," Fiona apologized, suddenly self-conscious about the modest accommodations. "It's more than I've had in months, Miss Nolan," Samuel assured her. "I've been sleeping under the stars with saddle for a pillow since leaving Texas." Fiona nodded, then awkwardly stood in the doorway, unsure what to say or do next. The enormity of what had happened was beginning to sink in. "Miss Nolan," Samuel said gently, "I know it's not my place, but for what it's worth, any man who'd leave a lady like yourself standing at the altar isn't worthy of your tears." A sob escaped her lips before she could stop it. "You don't understand. Everyone in town was there. Everyone saw. I'll never be able to show my face again without being the woman Thomas Blackwell abandoned." Samuel's expression darkened at the name. "Blackwell? Thomas Blackwell was your groom?" Fiona looked up, surprised. "You know him. We crossed paths in Durango last year," Samuel said carefully. "Let's just say he made an impression, and not a good one. He was gambling with money that didn't belong to him." Fiona felt as if the floor had fallen away beneath her feet. Thomas had always been so particular about money, insisting they save every penny for their future. Had that all been a lie too? I need to change, she said abruptly, turning away. Please make yourself comfortable, Mr. Winters. There's water in the pitcher for washing up. She fled upstairs to the small apartment she shared with her father, closing the door behind her, before finally allowing the tears to flow freely. She tore at the buttons of her wedding dress, desperate to be free of it, of all it represented, her foolish dreams and wasted years. By the time her father returned, Fiona had changed into a simple blue dress and had washed her face, though her eyes remained red and swollen. She sat at the kitchen table, staring blankly at the wall. "I sent the guests home," Michael said, removing his hat and jacket. "Mrs. Peterson will see to the flowers and food. Nothing will go to waste," Fiona nodded numbly. "Did anyone know? Was there any sign that Thomas was planning this?" Michael sighed heavily, taking a seat across from her. Clara said she'd heard rumors that Thomas had been meeting with investors from Denver, something about a silver claim he'd purchased, but nothing to suggest he'd. He trailed off, unable to say the words. "Leave me at the altar," Fiona finished for him. "Make me the laughingstock of Anima's Forks. Destroy any chance I had at a normal life here." "Now, Fiona," her father began, "this town loves you. They're more angry at Thomas than amused by your situation." "That doesn't make it any easier to face them," she replied, her voice hollow. A knock at the door interrupted them. Samuel stood in the doorway, hat in his hands. "Forgive the intrusion," he said. "I was wondering if there might be somewhere in town to get a meal. I don't want to impose any further on your hospitality." Michael waved him in. "Nonsense. We've got plenty of stew left from yesterday. Sit and eat with us, Mr. Winters. I'd like to hear more about your travels." Over a simple meal of beef stew and biscuits, Samuel shared stories of cattle drives from Texas to Kansas, of the changing landscape of the West as railroads pushed farther into territories once considered wild and untamed. Fiona found herself listening despite her misery, occasionally asking questions about places she'd only read about in books or newspapers. Samuel spoke well for a cowboy, she noted, with an education that seemed at odds with his chosen profession. "If you don't mind my asking, Mr. Winters," Michael said as they finished their meal, "what brings a Texas cowboy all the way to a dying mining town in Colorado?" Samuel hesitated, setting down his coffee cup carefully. "I'm looking for someone, actually. A man who came through these parts about 6 months ago. Daniel Foster. He was my partner in a cattle venture in Texas. We pooled our money to buy a small herd, but he disappeared with all the cash before we could purchase the cattle." Fiona and her father exchanged glances. "Foster was here," Michael confirmed. "Came through last November, stayed about 2 weeks, claimed to be a mining expert, convinced several locals to invest in a silver claim north of town." "Let me guess," Samuel said grimly. "The claim turned out to be worthless," Michael nodded. "Cleaned out half the town before disappearing. Sheriff tried to track him, but a November blizzard covered his trail." "That's his way," Samuel replied. "He finds desperate people, sells them hope, then vanishes before they realize they've been swindled." Fiona stared at her plate, a cold feeling settling in her stomach. Thomas had mentioned investing in a silver claim last winter. He'd been secretive about it, telling her it was going to be a surprise for their future. "Thomas invested with Foster," she said quietly. "He told me it was going to make us rich." Samuel's expression softened with understanding. "And when the claim proved worthless, he found himself deep in debt with no way out. So he ran," Fiona finished, the pieces finally falling into place. Rather than face me, rather than tell me the truth, he just ran. Men like that always run, Samuel said, a hint of anger in his voice. They can't face the consequences of their actions. That night, as Fiona lay in bed staring at the ceiling, she realized the future she had planned no longer existed. Tomorrow, she would have to face the town, their pity and whispers. The life she'd imagined with Thomas had vanished like morning mist, leaving her adrift in a familiar place that suddenly felt alien. Samuel rose before dawn the next morning, joining Michael in the store to help unload the supply wagons that arrived every other Monday. Fiona watched from the window as he easily lifted crates and barrels that usually required two men to move, working steadily alongside her father with minimal conversation. When she finally gathered the courage to come downstairs and begin her usual duties in the store, the first customers arrived. Mrs. Peterson entered first, her expression overly sympathetic. "Fiona, dear," she began, "I just wanted to see how you were doing after yesterday's unfortunate events." Before Fiona could respond, the door opened again, admitting Clara and two other young women from town. "We saved you some of the wedding cake," Clara said, placing a small package on the counter. It seemed a shame to waste it. Fiona felt her face burning with humiliation. "Thank you," she managed, "but I really have work to do." "Of course, dear," Mrs. Peterson said, patting her hand. "We just want you to know that no one blames you for what happened. Thomas Blackwell showed his true colors and you're better off without him. Though it's such a shame about the wedding," one of the other girls added. "Everything was so beautiful." Fiona busied herself arranging items on a shelf, willing them to make their purchases and leave. Samuel entered from the storeroom, arms loaded with sacks of flour. The women fell silent, watching him with undisguised curiosity. "Where would you like these, Miss Nolan?" he asked, seemingly oblivious to the attention. "On the back shelf, please, Mr. Winters," she replied, grateful for the distraction. Mrs. Peterson's eyebrows rose. "And who might this be, Fiona? I don't believe we've had the pleasure." "Samuel Winters, madam," he replied before Fiona could answer. "Just passing through town and helping Mr. Nolan with some heavy lifting." "How fortunate that you arrived when you did," Clara said, a hint of mischief in her eyes. "Just in time to escort our Fiona home from her almost wedding." "Clara," Fiona protested. "Just coincidence, miss," Samuel said easily. "Though I'm honored I could be of service to Miss Nolan during a difficult moment." His quiet dignity made the women's gossip seem petty by comparison. They soon made their purchases and left, though not without significant looks back at Samuel. "I'm sorry about that," Fiona said once they were alone. "Small towns and their need for gossip. No different than cowboys around a campfire," Samuel replied with a small smile. "Human nature to talk about other folks' business, I suppose." Throughout the day, more townspeople found reasons to visit the store, their curiosity about Fiona's state of mind and the handsome stranger equally transparent. Fiona endured their sympathetic glances and not so subtle questions with as much grace as she could muster, though by closing time her nerves were frayed to breaking. "You handled yourself well today," Samuel commented as he helped her close the store. "Many would have hidden away after such an experience." "I considered it," Fiona admitted, "but hiding wouldn't change anything and the store needs tending. Still, it takes courage to face people after what happened." Fiona busied herself counting the day's receipts. "Mr. Winters, while I appreciate your kindness, I would prefer not to discuss yesterday's events further." Samuel nodded. "Of course. My apologies, Miss Nolan." They worked in silence for a few minutes before Fiona spoke again. "How long do you plan to stay in Anima's Forks?" "Not sure," he replied. "Depends on whether I can pick up Foster's trail. Could be a few days, could be longer. And then back to Texas. Samuel leaned against the counter, considering. Not much waiting for me there anymore. My partner stole our money, and the drought last summer wiped out most of the small ranchers. Might head to Wyoming or Montana, see if the cattle business is any better up north. The bell over the door jangled as Michael returned from delivering an order to the hotel down the street. Stores all closed up, Papa, Fiona reported. It was busy today. Michael's expression told her he understood the real reason for the increased business. Vultures, he muttered. Nothing better to do than pick over other folks' misfortunes. They mean well, most of them, Fiona said, though she wasn't entirely convinced. Winters, Michael said, turning to Samuel. You did good work today. The offer of the room stands if you want to stay on a while. Could use the help around here. Samuel glanced at Fiona as if seeking her approval. She gave a small nod, surprising herself. Despite her embarrassment at him witnessing her abandonment, there was something reassuring about his presence. Thank you, sir, Samuel replied. I'd be glad to stay on until I get word about Foster. The days fell into a pattern. Samuel worked in the store, impressing customers with his strength and quiet courtesy. Fiona gradually began to emerge from her shell of humiliation, finding that focusing on work helped keep her mind from dwelling on Thomas's betrayal. A week after the wedding that wasn't, Sheriff Davis paid a visit to the store. He pulled Michael and Samuel aside for a private conversation, but Fiona overheard enough to understand that Thomas had been spotted in Denver, apparently flush with cash from some unknown source. That night at supper, she confronted her father. Thomas didn't just run because he lost money on Foster's swindle, did he? What aren't you telling me, Papa? Michael exchanged glances with Samuel, who had become a regular at their evening meals. Fiona, perhaps it's better if you don't know all the details. I was going to marry him, she insisted. I have a right to know what kind of man he truly is. After a long moment, Samuel spoke. The sheriff received a telegram from Denver. It seems Thomas wasn't just Foster's victim, he became his partner. They've been working together, swindling folks across Colorado. Fiona felt as if she'd been struck. That's not possible. Thomas was. He was respectable. His family has lived in Animas Forks for years. Which made him the perfect front man, Michael said gently. No one would suspect the son of Judge Blackwell of being involved in confidence schemes. The money from the investments here in town, Fiona said slowly, the truth dawning on her. He didn't lose it in Foster's swindle. He took it. And when the wedding approached, he realized he couldn't maintain the charade any longer, Samuel finished. So he ran, rather than face the consequences. Fiona pushed away from the table, her appetite gone. Excuse me, I need some air. Outside, the evening was cool, stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Fiona wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders, trying to reconcile the man she thought she knew with the criminal he had become. The door opened behind her, and Samuel stepped out, keeping a respectful distance. I'm sorry, Miss Nolan, he said quietly. That was a harsh truth to hear. I lived with him in this town for 2 years, she replied, her voice hollow. I thought I knew him. How could I have been so blind? Con men are good at showing people what they want to see, Samuel said. It's not your fault. Fiona turned to face him. Why are you really tracking Foster, Mr. Winters? Is it just about the money he stole from you? Samuel was silent for a long moment. My younger brother followed Foster's scheme too, lost everything, including our family ranch. He took his own life rather than face the shame of it. His voice was steady, but Fiona could hear the pain beneath the words. I'm tracking Foster to make sure he can't destroy any more lives. Fiona moved closer, placing a hand on his arm. I'm so sorry, Samuel. It was the first time she'd used his given name, and something shifted between them in that moment, a recognition of shared pain, of understanding that went beyond polite conversation. The next few weeks brought changes to Anima's Forks. News of Thomas's criminal activities spread through town, transforming Fiona from object of pity to figure of sympathy. Many came forward to admit they too had invested in Foster and Thomas's fraudulent mining claim, too embarrassed previously to admit they'd been duped. Samuel continued working at the store, his presence becoming a familiar comfort to both Fiona and her father. He had a way with customers, an honest approach that earned their trust, and business improved steadily under his influence. One evening in late June, as Fiona was closing up the store, Sheriff Davis arrived with a telegram. His expression was grave as he handed it to Samuel. "Thought you'd want to see this right away, Winters. They caught Foster and Blackwell in Santa Fe. Apparently they tried their scheme on the wrong man, a federal marshal traveling undercover." Samuel read the telegram, his expression unreadable. "They're being transported to Denver for trial," he said finally. "The marshal wants me there to testify about the Texas operation." Fiona felt a strange mix of emotions: relief that Thomas would face justice, sadness for the future she'd once imagined, and now a new worry that Samuel would leave. "When will you go?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "The trial's set for mid-July," Samuel replied. "I should leave by the end of the week to make it in time." Michael clapped him on the shoulder. "You've been waiting for this, son. A chance to see justice done." That night, Fiona couldn't sleep. The thought of Samuel leaving disturbed her more than she wanted to admit. In the short time he'd been in Anima's Forks, he had become important to her in ways she hadn't fully recognized until now. The next morning, she found Samuel at the creek behind the store, washing his clothes in preparation for his journey. "Will you come back?" she asked without preamble. "After the trial, I mean." Samuel looked up, his hands stilling in the water. "Would you want me to?" Fiona's heart pounded in her chest. "Yes," she said simply. "I would." He stood, drying his hands on his pants. "I've grown fond of Anima's Forks," he said carefully, "and its people." "Just the people in general," she pressed, surprising herself with her boldness. A slow smile spread across Samuel's face. "Some more than others, Miss Nolan." "Fiona," she corrected him. "I think after all this time you should call me Fiona." "Fiona," he repeated, the name sounding different in his voice. "I've been thinking about settling down somewhere, starting fresh." "Anima's Forks could use a man with your talents," she suggested. "Papa's not getting any younger and the store's doing better than it has in years since you arrived." Samuel took a step closer. "Is that the only reason you'd want me to return?" Fiona met his gaze steadily. "No." The week before Samuel's departure passed too quickly. They never spoke directly of feelings, but something had changed between them, small touches as they worked together in the store, lingering glances across the dinner table, conversations that stretched late into the evening. On the morning he was to leave, Fiona walked with him to the stagecoach. The summer sun was already high, promising another scorching day. "It's a 6-week round trip, if all goes well with the trial," Samuel said as they waited for the driver to finish loading luggage. "I'll be back before the first snow." "I'll hold you to that promise, Samuel Winters," Fiona replied, trying for a lightness she didn't feel. "The store inventory comes in September, and Papa will need help with the heavy lifting." Samuel smiled, seeing through her practical facade. "Is that all you'll need me for, Fiona Nolan?" "Heavy lifting." Before she could respond, the stage driver called for passengers to board. Samuel hesitated, then quickly pulled a small package from his pocket. "I wanted to give you this," he said, pressing it into her hand. "Open it after I've gone." The stagecoach departed in a cloud of dust, Samuel's face at the window until a bend in the road took him from view. Fiona opened the small package with trembling fingers. Inside was a delicate silver pendant in the shape of a star, attached to a simple chain. A note accompanied it. To remind you that even the darkest night has stars to guide you home, I will return. The weeks of Samuel's absence dragged by. Fiona wore his pendant daily, touching it whenever thoughts of him grew strongest. Letters arrived sporadically, telling of his journey, the trial preparations, and finally the trial itself. Thomas and Foster were convicted and sentenced to 10 years in prison for their crimes across 3 states. "Justice has been served," Samuel wrote. "Now I can look forward instead of back. I'll be on the northbound stage by the time you receive this letter." September brought cooler weather to the mountains and the largest inventory shipment the store had seen in years. Michael grumbled about the work ahead, but Fiona reminded him that Samuel would return soon to help. "You've grown quite attached to that young man," her father observed as they sorted merchandise. "He seems to feel the same way about you." Fiona blushed. "We understand each other, Papa. We both know what it's like to be betrayed by someone you trusted." "There's more to it than that," Michael replied. "I've seen the way you look at each other. It's how your mother and I used to look at each other." Before Fiona could respond, the store bell jingled. She looked up, expecting a customer, but instead saw Samuel standing in the doorway, travel-worn but smiling. "Samuel!" she exclaimed, propriety forgotten as she rushed toward him. He caught her in an embrace, lifting her off her feet in his enthusiasm. "I told you I'd be back before the first snow," he said when he finally set her down, though he kept his arms around her. Michael cleared his throat loudly, bringing them both back to awareness of his presence. Samuel quickly released Fiona, a flush rising on his tanned face. "Mr. Nolan," he said, extending his hand. "Good to see you again, sir." "Likewise, Winters," Michael replied, shaking his hand firmly, "though I see my daughter has already given you quite the welcome." "Papa," Fiona protested, her own cheeks burning. That evening, after supper, Samuel asked Fiona to walk with him. The night was clear, stars brilliant in the mountain sky above Anima's Forks. "I've been thinking a lot during my time away," he said as they strolled toward the edge of town. "About the future, about what I want." "And what conclusions did you reach?" Fiona asked, her heart pounding with anticipation. Samuel stopped, turning to face her. "I want to stay here. Your father has offered to sell me a share in the store, says he's ready to start taking it easier." "He never mentioned that to me," Fiona said, surprised. "He wanted to wait until I returned," Samuel explained, "to see if I was serious about staying." "And are you serious about staying?" Samuel took her hands in his. "That depends." "On what?" "On whether there's a future for me here beyond the store." He looked down at their joined hands, then back to her eyes. "I know it hasn't been that long since what happened with Thomas, and I understand if you're not ready. But I need you to know that I've fallen in love with you, Fiona Nolan. I didn't come to Anima's Forks looking for love, but I found it anyway." Fiona felt tears gathering in her eyes, but unlike the tears she'd shed on her wedding day, these were born of happiness, not despair. "When Thomas left me at the church, I thought my life was over," she said softly. "I couldn't imagine facing the town, building a new future. But then you walked me home and something changed. Day by day, you helped me see that what I'd lost wasn't worth having in the first place." She reached up to touch his face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "I love you too, Samuel Winters. Not because you rescued me, but because of who you are, honest, kind, and brave enough to face the past instead of running from it." He drew her closer, his eyes asking a question. When she nodded, he lowered his lips to hers in a gentle kiss that promised a future neither of them had imagined when they first met outside the church that May morning. 1 year later, Fiona Nolan became Fiona Winters in a simple ceremony in the same church where she had once been abandoned. This time, there was no elaborate dress or fancy decorations, just honest vows exchanged between two people who had found love in the aftermath of betrayal. The town of Animas Forks celebrated their union with genuine joy, the scandal of the previous year long forgotten as they witnessed the happiness the couple had found together. The Nolan and Winters General Store became the heart of the community as the silver mines slowly revived under new management, bringing fresh life to the mountain town. On their first anniversary, Samuel presented Fiona with a small wooden box. Inside was a deed to a piece of land just outside town, with plans for a house drawn carefully on parchment paper. "It's time we had a home of our own," he said, watching her face light up as she examined the drawings. "Your father insists he's not ready to give up the apartment above the store yet, though I suspect he just wants to give us our privacy." "It's perfect," Fiona whispered, imagining their future in the house Samuel had designed: room for children, a garden plot, even a small stable for the horses Samuel had begun breeding as a side business. As winter gave way to spring, and spring to summer, their dreams took shape in the form of a sturdy house overlooking the valley. When autumn came again, bringing with it the news that Fiona was expecting their first child, they stood together on the porch of their new home, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold. "Did you ever imagine this?" Fiona asked, leaning back against her husband's chest as his arms encircled her and their unborn child. "When you walked me home that day, did you think we'd end up here?" Samuel pressed a kiss to her temple. "I knew you were special from the moment I saw you," he admitted. "But this is better than anything I could have imagined." "Sometimes," Fiona mused, "the path we think we're meant to follow turns out to be wrong, and it's only when everything falls apart that we find our true way home." "Home," Samuel repeated, the word rich with meaning as he gazed at the life they'd built together. "That's exactly what we've found." As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Fiona touched the silver pendant she still wore every day, a reminder of how light can be found even in the darkest moments, and how sometimes the greatest love stories begin when everything seems lost.